Okay.
Hello, my name is Jalondra A. Davis, and I'm a PhD student in the Department of Ethnic Studies at UC Riverside in my first year. I really thank the department and all of the coordinating faculty for being present at this event, and I regret that I could not be there. I'm at a conference in Berkeley, Speculative Visions, where I am exploring my interest in Afrofuturism as a possible dissertation focus. So I did want to make sure that I introduce myself to all of you and my work and where I'm coming from. So for the purpose of this presentation, I decided to really sort of focus on my sort of trajectory up until this point and the ways in which it's formed a basis for, you know, where I'm coming from and what I want to do with my academic career. Because it's really important to me to constantly remind myself and those I'm working with of you know, what is informing and pushing me in my work. So, okay. I've taken somewhat of a circular route through my career in education, which has embedded me in highly diverse sites of knowledge production. My undergraduate education in African American Studies centered Afrocentric theory, and my interest in creative writing and community empowerment led me to become deeply involved in the LA Black cultural arts community that operated within a decidedly cultural nationalist framework. These sites changed my life by making Blackness something to celebrate, center, and to aspire to, rather than something I learned from childhood to associate with violent neighborhoods, bad behavior, and intellectual inferiority. They gave me a sense of empowerment and identity that developed my confidence and instilled me with the determination to center this new conception of Blackness in all areas of my life. My studies, my writing, my personal choices about where to live, where to spend my time, how to choose my jewelry, and how to style my hair. After graduate study in creative writing, I began teaching first literature and then a broader array of topics in the Africana Studies Department of CSU Dominguez Hills, which is highly nationalist and Pan-Africanist in its orientation. I was the youngest faculty member, the only part-time adjunct, and the only female. While my colleagues were supportive and I felt respected and treated as an equal in the department, I gradually started to see more of the subtle and blatant ways in which sexism, homophobia, and power were operating in Black intellectual, creative, and civic social spaces, both inside and outside of the academy. In cultural enclaves such as Leimert Park, I had intense discussions with poets who asserted that homosexuality was a threat to the progress of the Black community because its unions could not produce children that were needed for revolution. I saw these spaces dominated by men, with women constantly represented within the limiting and pedestal figure of Nubian queen. In Black Studies conferences, I faced challenge and outright hostility by scholars, both male and female, upset by my use of Black feminism as an analytic. As I graded papers in my classes at Dominguez, I became aware of how students were being trained to see feminism as a foreign imposition with no bearing on Black women's lives. And as I lived with my mother and helped her to raise my younger sister in an inner city community, I increasingly saw how much a gender analytic other than Africana womanism, which is the heteronormative and African-centered darling of my department and some other spaces, was needed to understand my mother, my sister, and so many other Black women's lives. I began to question some of the materials I inherited as a new lecturer, to make efforts to nuance and complicate what we were teaching our students about African culture, and to incorporate greater attention to women, non-normative subjectivities, gender, and sexuality into our curriculum and programming. I began my doctoral studies at Claremont Graduate University, where I was exposed to critical theory outside of a nationalist frame, oriented to the current debates and trends in the broader academy, and assisted in my tentative forays into grappling with difference and complex subjectivities in Black communities and liberation movements. But I was also frustrated with the distance between our high theory conversations and the real stakes and struggles of everyday people, and a tendency towards dismissal of any efforts at solidarity and social change through the framework of collective identity. Ethnic Studies at UC Riverside has provided me with the kind of intellectual space that I needed, the critical challenge necessary to develop my nascent critique of Black nationalism with an orientation that centers, excuse the puppy, with an orientation Okay, I'm going to start that sentence over. I began my doctoral studies at Claremont Graduate University, where I was exposed to critical theory outside of a nationalist frame, oriented to the current debates and trends in the broader academy, and assisted in my tentative forays into grappling with difference and complex subjectivities in black communities and liberation movements. But I was also frustrated with the distance between our theoretical conversations and the real stakes and struggles of everyday people, and a tendency towards dismissal of any efforts at solidarity and social change through the framework of collective identity. Ethnic studies at UC Riverside has provided me with the kind of intellectual space that I needed, the critical challenges necessary to develop my nascent critique of black nationalism within an orientation that centers rather than dismisses the identity-based analytics and activism of people of color. I finally find myself in a space where I can be completely honest about my affective relationship to the intellectual interests and to my intellectual interests and to the curving path that they have taken. I receive more support and advising here than I've ever encountered in the graduate program, which is providing me with direction and encouragement that I have needed to envision the trajectory of my academic career. As my education here sharpens my critique of structural power and violence, I find myself an increasing minority in debates in black social spaces about the means to improve the quality and longevity of black life, as I offer systematic analysis to conversations that so often turn to self-disparagement and calls for better entrepreneurship, normative nuclear families, and cultural reformation. These living room debates heighten my awareness to how a nationalist framework operates across class lines and political orientations in the black community. I would like to develop my expertise in the areas of 20th century African American political and cultural movements, women of color feminisms and global feminisms, and Africana women's literary culture and theory. My interests are in critiquing various forms of black nationalism through intersectional cultural criticism of non-canonical popular and literary culture, particularly forms such as spoken word poetry, speculative literature, urban lit, commercial film, and web media, which are often under the radar of academic criticism but deeply experienced and engaged in by broader publics. I am contemplating a few different ideas for my dissertation, but my current tentative plan, inspired by my work with Nalo Hopkinson in creative writing, is to look at the way in which the negotiation of difference and Africana women's fantasy and science fiction contests a nationalist prophetic vision. Feminist and queer critiques of black nationalism are by now fairly common in the academy, but my primary area of intervention is the broader community of African Americans in the U.S. I argue that black nationalism, as it became practiced and understood in the broader African American community through rhetoric, through slogan, and through the association with charismatic male leaders and silenced female icons, was frozen ideologically during the increasing institution of Africana Black studies in the academy, which fostered the discipline's increasing distance from the material struggles that gave it birth. While many sites in the academy are still shaped around black nationalism and show continued resistance to feminist critique, my interest is the way in which it informs larger black social and political thought. The kind of nationalism that informs a black common sense takes on the veneers of self-determination, self-defense, and black pride, while steadily eschewing a critical structural critique of the state and dominant institutions. Most disturbingly, and in collaboration with the black church, it semi-consciously celebrates a masculine subject and enforces a rigid policing of gender and sexuality. Manifesting itself in new wave militancy, cultural nationalist projects, liberal politics, and entertainment, this living room nationalism, as I have coined it, urges a pull up by the bootstraps philosophy that dismisses structural explanations for black inequity and centers heteronormativity in the quest for self and community improvement. So that is where I am right now. I hope to be getting in touch with some of the cooperating faculty to help to sort of refine my vision and my progress in my studies. So thank you very much, and I hope to meet you all soon.